Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the Compassionate, the Merciful. My name is Ibrahim Hooper. I'm National Communications Director for CAIR. We'll try and keep it short, releasing this very important report on Islamophobia, one of our periodic publications of this type. First, we'll hear a few words from CAIR's National Executive Director, Nihad Awad. Then we'll hear from the report's author, Corey Saylor, the head of our anti-Islamophobia department. So first of all, Nihad Awad, CAIR National Executive Director.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Good morning. My name is Nihad Awad, Nihad Awad, the National Executive Director of CAIR. And thank you very much for coming. First, allow me to thank Corey Saylor for leading the effort on this report, on his team. I hope that it is going to be informational because Islamophobia is an issue that we deal with every day, but it has not been identified as an organized phenomenon. Islamophobia, or as I call it, the anti-Muslim propaganda, has unfortunately moved from the fringes of American society to the mainstream. Viable contenders for the office of presidency, such as Donald Trump, have suggested the unconstitutional policies, such as banning Muslims from the United States, profiling American Muslims just because of their faith. Donald Trump has announced this recently. Creating a database of American Muslims. It reminds me of what happened to the Jews in Europe, in Germany. Other candidates, such as Ted Cruz and others, have suggested monitoring American Muslim neighborhoods. There is no such thing as Muslim neighborhoods in America. And many of these suggestions come from questionable studies and polls by hate groups and individuals cited in this report. One of these groups is the Center for Security Policy and its leader, Frank Gaffney. Gaffney has been recently exposed in a story by the Washington Post about a couple of days ago. And I'm sure Corey will elaborate more on some of these groups and individuals. So as we can see, the Islamophobia network is organized, is well-funded, and it employs misinformation and fear about Islam and Muslims. They use it as a major tool to mobilize fearful Americans or uninformed Americans or Americans who have not been in touch with the American Muslim community. Some of these groups organize anti-Islam legislation in cities and states across the nation. The anti-Muslim propaganda has reached an all-time high. It's turning deadly. Several American Muslims have been murdered in recent years. Hate attacks and vandalism against mosques are becoming more frequent. We hear reports about the widespread of bullying of Muslim children. The bullying that they go through is not only caused by their peers, but by their teachers and school officials. We are very concerned about the negative impact this destructive phenomenon has on our safety, on the safety of million Americans, their families, and their children. We are very concerned about the direction in which our country is going. We should reject all forms of extremism and hate. We have seen it in Orlando, where the lives of 49 people have been taken and many more were injured. Many families have been destroyed. And we have seen the ugly exploitation of this tragedy by politicians like Donald Trump. We call on our leaders to unite Americans, not to divide them. To unite them to live up to the ideals that made this nation so great. The ideals of equality, liberty, and justice for all. Thank you.
And when they had mentioned the people who have been murdered in recent years, that includes those who are perceived to be Muslim. There was an individual shot on Christmas Eve in Dallas. A guy shouting about Muslims went to Omar's tire shop in Dallas, opened fire, and killed one person. Happened to be somebody who wasn't Muslim, just happened to be visiting at the time. So perception can be just as deadly. So we'll hear about the content of the report from Corey Saylor, and he'll give you his title, which is kind of long, and I never remember all of it. So Corey Saylor.
Good morning, and we want to thank you all for coming out today. My name is Corey Saylor. I am the director of the Department to Monitor and Combat Islamophobia, more easily said as spokesperson. We want to talk to you really quickly about the content of the report. So it's Islamophobia and its impact in the United States. So the first thing that we want to talk about is when we're looking at it, what's our vision? And we're looking toward a time when being Muslim carries a positive connotation in society. So right now, the keywords that you hear when people are thinking about stereotypes about Muslim, they tend to be generally overwhelmingly negative. And then we're also looking for a time when Islam has an equal place among many faiths in America's pluralistic society. And right now, as we go through things, you'll see that one of the challenges to particularly the Bill of Rights and that equal place is that Islam is being singled out and targeted by legislators, some of whom are looking to vilify the religion. How do we put the report together? Just really quickly, this is based on a review of more than 25,000 media stories, more than 500 tax filings, and more than 81 legislative bills, plus a number of conversations and interviews. So the first thing to get to, and it's the circular poster over here on the side, we look at the different groups that are using Islamophobic sentiment in their work, and we identify what we call as an inner core. The inner core of the U.S. Islamophobia network, which is made up of 33 groups, are groups who, when you look at the sum total of their work and their messaging, they exist pretty much simply to vilify Muslims and Islam, to make people afraid of Muslims and Islam. There's another 41 groups that use Islamophobic sentiment pretty regularly, but they do a lot of other things. So we call them the outer core of the U.S. Islamophobia network. And we'll introduce you to a couple of these groups as we go through the presentation. But when you look at those 33 inner core groups and you examine tax filings for them over the period between 2008 and 2013, what you arrive at is that these groups had something on the order of $205 million at least in total revenue that was used essentially to make people afraid of Islam and Muslims. And how that breaks down on a yearly basis is somewhere in the ballpark of about $30 million each year is being spent in this country purely to make people afraid of Islam and Muslims. So you're looking at the presidential campaign and you're thinking, wow, those aren't the most massive sums of money. I would say all that much money being spent to target a minority community is pretty significant. But what's the impact? First and foremost, as of the writing of the report, 10 states, 1/5 of the nation, had passed laws that were intended to vilify Islam. Now, 8 of the 10 are based on something that's known as American Laws for American Courts. It's a template piece of legislation written by a man named David Yerushalmi. The law, American Laws for American Courts, gets around the Constitution by not specifically mentioning Islam. It mentions foreign law. And then when you look at the conversations around the introduction of the bills, it's always we need to protect America from Sharia, as if Muslims are interested in changing the law in the United States. The Constitution is the law of the land. We like it that way. But the conspiracy theory is that somehow less than 2% of the population is going to try to change the laws of the United States. As a result, as I said, 1/5 of the states in this country have passed anti-Islam bills. This isn't in the report, but in terms of more recent impact, I want to point you to the statement that Donald Trump's campaign issued in December talking about banning Muslims from the United States. That press release that was issued specifically mentions Center for Security Policy, one of those inner core organizations that we're talking about. So when we talk about impact, we see laws and we see an ability to impact the national political dialogue. And again, let's talk about Ted Cruz's campaign. His National Security Coalition included three staff members of the Center for Security Policy. I'm using that group as just our example of the other 33 organizations. It also included a member of an outer core group, the Oak Initiative, named Jerry Boykin. Jerry Boykin is well known for his belief that mosques do not deserve First Amendment protections in this country. So you have people with those kind of sentiments, which are anti-constitutional at least, advising major contenders for the presidency of our nation. We also want to talk about the real world impact on the ground, beyond laws and advisors to political campaigns. We track mosque incidents. So when a mosque is targeted by bias for any number of different reasons, we count that. If you look at this chart, you will see that normally we track in the low 20 incidents every year. We know this number is low, but we also know that in many instances, mosque leadership and members of mosques don't report or are hesitant to report incidents. But we have third-party verification of each of these cases. So low 20s usually, last year, 78 separate incidents. And that involved things like a firebombing of a mosque in Coachella, shots being fired at a mosque in Connecticut, and then you all saw the armed anti-Islam demonstration that took place in front of the Islamic Community Center in Phoenix last year. Each of those would be counted as an incident. And the thing to note about last year in particular is that the category that we call DDV, which is damage, destruction, vandalism, was notably high. So the last time we had a really intense cycle of anti-mosque incidents was in 2010 during the national controversy over Park 51, the Ground Zero Mosque. That was characterized by attempts to stop mosque construction and expansion, what we call zoning incidents. This time around, it has a much more violent tenor to it, and we see a lot more acts of intimidation targeting mosques. Of those 78 incidents, 34 of them occurred in November and December of last year, which many of us consider to be one of the worst periods of anti-Islam sentiment that we've seen since 9/11. Children aren't exempt. So what we've seen in at least 2 states, there's been other reports on bullying. I'm going to focus on the legislative side of it. At least 2 states now have passed laws changing the way they examine school textbooks as a result of anti-Islam campaigns. I want to be clear, in neither of these cases did they specifically in the legislation target Islam, but what you saw was an anti-Islam campaign that took place. For instance, in Tennessee, you had a lady who believes that extreme Islam bias and indoctrination is being taught in schools. Usually what that is when a teacher is just giving students the basic understanding of Islam, the 5 key points of Islam. One of them is there is no God but God. Muhammad is the prophet of God. Merely teaching that gets converted into indoctrination. And as a result of this woman's campaign against the textbooks, she went and met with a state legislator. That state legislator introduced a piece of legislation that eventually became law. What happened in Tennessee is that, well, school textbooks, the way they're being reviewed has changed. Last couple of points that we really want to focus on in terms of issues. 2 new phenomena that we've observed during this period under review in this report. And that would be armed anti-Islam demonstrations. We talked about that already. Right now there's a group in Texas called BEAR, the Bureau of American-Islamic Relations, a play on the name of this organization. They're regularly showing up in front of mosques with guns. When they're interviewed and asked why they feel like they need to bring weapons to a demonstration, they say it's to protect themselves. Also new phenomena, Muslim-free businesses. So we have a number of institutions that are declaring themselves Muslim-free zones and saying that they will not service Muslim customers. This has actually only been tested once, to my knowledge, in Oklahoma, and it's now the subject of a lawsuit because a Muslim veteran was denied access to a facility. So the key to this report is not all just bad news, and that's what's important to us. What are we going to do to change things? So what we did is to present a problem to a number of experts, and that problem is essentially 3 points. How do you change public sentiment given that Muslims are less than 2% of the population, given that American Muslim organizations have consequently limited financial resources, and that American Muslims are subject to the actions of outsiders at any time? And to highlight that third point, you had a conversation, a very important one, about the role of Islam in this country in the wake of the passing of Muhammad Ali. And it was a chance for America to discuss Islam in a very positive fashion for once. And that entire conversation was wiped out by the Orlando shooting, which we're still not really clear on what the shooter's motives were. One way or another, they're contemptible, but we're still not clear on what the shooter's motives were. So the answer that we came up with to that problem is what we call an environment-centric strategy. In the past, we've done things to try to change the environment, but much of our focus was on going after anti-Muslim groups and trying to delegitimize them. Now the conversation has to be more about how do we make sure that Islamophobic sentiment faces the same kind of revulsion in American society as, say, white supremacism and anti-Semitism, things that should be treated with contempt and revulsion. So the groups that push, for instance, white supremacism, the KKK, they are legal. As long as they stay within the law, they're allowed to do the things that they want to do. We like it that way. We believe in a strong conversation in this country. But groups like the KKK should be having their conferences in dingy hotel rooms, not featured in the U.S. Congress, not featured on the floors of legislatures around the country. So that's the difference we're talking about. We want to see those who push Islamophobia on the fringes of society, not part of the mainstream conversation. And in order to do that, we have 4 points, and we'll be wrapping up the report. The key 4 points to the strategy are, first and foremost, the 2 goals of Islam's Sharia are for Muslims to be a benefit to humanity and avert harm from humanity, right? Be a benefit to humanity, not just Muslims. Avert harm from humanity, not just Muslims. So in order to be seen stronger contributing society, we're advising Muslims that we need to get out and be part of other movements in a more visible way. There are many issues that our ideas of social justice compel us to be involved in. Black Lives Matter, immigration reform, things like that. It's not our goal to go out and say, hi guys, the Muslims are here, we're going to take over. It's our goal to be good allies. That's what our faith tells us to be, to work for social justice in the society. I would argue that in the survival mode that the Muslim community has been in since 9/11, sometimes we forget this. So we want to make it a centerpiece, a priority, and consistently reminding people, let's get out, let's be more involved, more visible. When Muslims are giving out water in Flint, Michigan, which needs it, we want to make sure more attention gets called to that, because that's Muslims living the principles of their faith. Second point, as we kind of alluded to already, Islamophobia should be seen through the same lens as anti-Semitism and white supremacism. It's the same hate, this is just a different target. Third point of the strategy, more empowered voices. The Muslim community is not monolithic. Anybody who pays attention to it will see that we have significant, healthy debates going on among ourselves every year, every day. Our major holiday, Eid, is a topic of significant debate. When is it going to happen? Because it's based on a moon sighting. So if we can have these kind of healthy debates, we want all of those voices to be trained and go out and speak to the public at large. Let's let the public at large see more of us talking about the full spectrum of views that exist within the Muslim community. And then, as the fourth and final point, we want to enhance the public sector impact of the American Muslim community. That means more people going to vote, more people understanding how to donate and participate in the political process, more people working on Capitol Hill, in the administration, in the state legislatures. So I want to sum up everything by just talking about this one picture. It's on the cover of the report. If you take away anything from that 10-minute presentation that sums up 3 years of my life, this picture is the final summary. This is at a hearing in Tennessee where a number of anti-Muslim people showed up. The young lady in the headscarf was there as a student journalist to cover it. The gentleman in the picture walked up to her, and if you look at him, I believe that to be one of the most impressive death stares I've ever seen in my life. And yet, she handled it in the exact way that I believe the Islamic faith, American ideals, and just general public morality suggest to us. You stand your ground, you be assertive, and you smile back, right? That's what we're talking about in the strategy. Don't be invisible, don't bury your head, be present at the hearing, and when someone challenges you, be assertive, be polite, stand your ground. If we assert our faith with confidence, the way we often do here at CAIR, then I have every belief that just like other minorities that have been targeted in this country, this community too will take its place. The stereotypes about this community will change, and our ability to contribute to an America that has many different faiths on an equal playing field will also be enhanced. So thank you. That's the report. We'll take questions.
Yes, just before we started here, I had jotted down some recent incidents that just happened in the last few days. We had an assault on a Muslim mother and daughter with anti-Muslim slurs in Maryland, arrest at a North Carolina mosque, armed individual making threats there, shots fired at the Islamic Society of North America sign in Indiana, 2 beatings of 2 Muslims outside 2 different mosques, a man arrested for threats to Seattle Mosque, a SWAT team called out for 2 Muslims praying on a platform in the Boston Metro, 2 different assaults in Tennessee where anti-Muslim slurs were used, mosque threats in Florida, Michigan, Illinois, an Arizona Syrian refugee family threatened with anti-Muslim notes, and a Pennsylvania pastor, he put up a "Have a Blessed Ramadan" sign, and a local right-wing official got a hold of that, put his number out there, and he was starting to get dozens of hate calls. So these are just some of the incidents just within the last 3-4 days. So you can see what we're talking about when we're doing a report of this kind. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.